What if you met someone who had never seen a book, a computer, or even a city? What if you could somehow bring a human from 10,000 years ago and put them in your world? They wouldn't know how to use your phone. They wouldn't understand a single letter you wrote. They wouldn't recognize money or buildings or cars. And when you watch them struggle, you might think something. You might think, this person is not as intelligent as me. Would they be stupid? Most people would say yes. A prehistoric human couldn't use a smartphone, couldn't read a book, couldn't do math, couldn't understand science or philosophy or economics. They'd be lost, helpless, obviously less intelligent. That's what we believe. That's what we've been taught to think. But I'm going to ask you to consider something else. What if you're wrong? Here's the thing. Most people think human intelligence has gotten better over time. We think our ancestors were dumber because they were less knowledgeable. But there's a problem with that answer, a big one. A prehistoric human's brain was almost exactly the same size as yours. Not smaller, not less developed, not primitive in structure. Same neurology, same number of neurons, same brain architecture. Same capacity to learn, same ability to remember, reason, and imagine. Same genes, same hardware, the same biological machine. In fact, if you took a prehistoric human and scanned their brain, you'd see almost no difference from a modern human brain. We're not smarter because we evolved better brains. So if their brain was the same as ours, what's different? This is where everything changes. What's different is not biology. What's different is information. Think about that word, information. A prehistoric human didn't have access to written language, recorded knowledge, cultural libraries, educational systems, technology, mathematical notation, scientific method, historical records. They had something we often forget we have. They had people. They had their community, their parents, their elders. They had the accumulated knowledge that their specific group had learned through experience. But they didn't have access to 10,000 years of collected human wisdom. They didn't have Google. They didn't have libraries. They didn't have universities. They didn't have the internet, which is basically the collective memory of human civilization. Now here's what makes this really interesting. Imagine this. Take a newborn baby from 10,000 years ago. Bring that baby to 2024. Raise them in a modern home. Send them to school. Give them access to the internet. In 20 years, that person would be completely normal. They could go to college. They could learn to code. They could understand quantum physics. Why? Not because they're special. Not because they magically evolved. But because they had access to the same information you have access to. The same books, the same teachers, the same systems of learning. That's the secret nobody talks about. You're not smarter than your ancestors because your brain is better. You're smarter because your brain has been filled with information that took thousands of years to collect. Let me say this clearly, because it changes everything. Intelligence is not the same as information. Intelligence is your capacity to learn, your ability to solve problems, your capability to understand complex ideas. Information is the actual knowledge you've accumulated. Here's an analogy. Imagine a computer from 1990 and a computer from 2024. The 2024 computer doesn't have a better processor just because it has more files on it. It might have more processing power, yes, but mostly it has more information loaded into it. More software, more data, more programs. A prehistoric human had the same processor as you. They just didn't have the software. They didn't have 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. They had something amazing though. They had the capacity to learn all of it, if given access, if given time. Here's what this means. A child from the Stone Age could learn everything you know. Not because their brain got bigger or better, but because they'd have access to the same information you have. They could learn to read, to write, to do mathematics, to understand biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, to use computers, to write poetry, to understand history, to grasp complex philosophical ideas. They could do it all, because their capacity for learning was the same. This brings us to something beautiful, and honestly, something that should change how you see yourself. Every person you are is built on inherited knowledge. Not genetic knowledge, not DNA instructions. Inherited knowledge. Think about everything you know. How to read. You didn't invent reading, someone taught you. How to speak your language. You didn't invent language, you inherited it from your culture. How to do math. You didn't discover mathematics. Thousands of people across thousands of years discovered it, and you learned it in school. How to use technology. You didn't invent computers. You're just using tools that others created. How to cook, build, think, socialize, communicate. All of it comes from people who came before you. Your parents taught you, teachers taught you, books taught you, videos taught you. And each of those people learned from people before them. It goes back centuries, millennia. You're not standing alone. You're standing on the shoulders of billions of people. Every person you learn from is a gift, a direct transfer of human knowledge. Think about the people who invented writing. Someone, thousands of years ago, figured out how to represent spoken language with symbols. That person didn't need to invent agriculture, mathematics, or architecture alone. They benefited from what people before them had learned, and then they passed it on. Their knowledge passed to the next generation, and the next, and the next, until it reached you. You're reading this because someone invented an alphabet. You can do mathematics because someone discovered numbers. You can understand history because someone figured out how to record events. Now let me ask you something harder. What if everyone took away your access to that information? What if you woke up tomorrow and every book disappeared? Every website offline, every t-shirt gone, every school closed, every written word erased, every digital record deleted? Could you survive? Could you invent agriculture? Could you figure out how to grow crops with no prior knowledge? Could you invent writing? Could you invent mathematics? Could you invent tools that require metal working? Could you figure out chemistry or physics or medicine? Alone, with no guidance, no books, no t-shirts? Here's the honest answer: probably not. At least not quickly, definitely not easily. It took humanity thousands of years to figure out agriculture. It took thousands more to invent writing. It took thousands more to develop science. These weren't quick discoveries. They were the result of countless generations of trial and error. Now imagine you had to do all of that alone. Starting from scratch. With no prior knowledge. With no guidance. You'd be helpless. A modern human, dropped alone in a forest with no tools, no knowledge of plants, no understanding of survival. That person would struggle as much as a prehistoric human would. Maybe more, because they'd be used to having information available instantly. This is what it means when we say a prehistoric human was less intelligent. They weren't less intelligent. They were less informed. They didn't have the software. This changes everything about how we think about intelligence. It changes how we think about education. It changes how we think about ourselves. Because here's the implication. If intelligence isn't genetic, if it's not something you're born with, then it's something you develop. It's something you inherit. It's something that can be taught. This is why education matters. Not to make you smarter. You're already as smart as you can be, biologically speaking. But to give you access to the information you need. This is why libraries matter. Not because books make you smarter, but because they give you access to thousands of years of human knowledge. This is why the internet matters. Not because screens make you intelligent, but because it's the largest transfer of information in human history. Every person on Earth can now access information that, 100 years ago, only elite scholars could read. That's not nothing. That's everything. A child born in poverty in a developing country can now access MIT lectures for free. They can learn quantum physics. They can read Shakespeare. They can study history. They have access to information that would have taken royal patronage 200 years ago. Let me give you some concrete examples. Think about someone you know who's smart. Maybe they're good at math, or they're great at writing, or they understand science. Do you think they were born that way? Or do you think they spent years learning? Do you think they had good teachers, good resources, good access to information? Here's what we know from psychology and education research. Intelligence is not fixed. It's not something you're born with a certain amount of. It's something that develops through experience, learning, and practice. A child who grows up with books around them will likely be a better reader than a child without books. Not because their brain is different, but because they had more exposure to reading, more information input. A person who studies mathematics for years will be better at math than someone who doesn't. Not because their brain is hardwired for numbers, but because they've practiced, they've learned, they've accumulated mathematical knowledge. A person who reads history extensively will understand history better than someone who doesn't. Not because they have a special brain, but because they've been fed more information about history. It's that simple, and it's that profound. Here's something else to consider. You live in an information environment. You're surrounded by information, constantly. Books, schools, websites, videos, podcasts, conversations. Information is just everywhere. Most people today have more information available to them than the most educated scholars had 100 years ago. A prehistoric human didn't live in an information environment. They lived in a knowledge environment. Their knowledge came from direct experience and from what their community had learned through experience. If your community had learned that a certain plant was poisonous, you knew that. If your community had learned how to make a certain tool, you could learn it. But you only knew what your community knew. You only had access to information that had been discovered by your specific group. If another group, on the other side of the world, had discovered something amazing, you'd never know about it. That discovery would be trapped in that community. Until writing, until trade, until communication networks, until the internet. Now imagine how different this is. A scientist in Japan makes a discovery. She publishes a paper. A researcher in Brazil reads it. He builds on it. He makes another discovery. A student in Kenya learns about both discoveries. She combines them in a new way. A programmer in India uses this knowledge to write code. And that code is used by millions of people worldwide. That's how modern knowledge works. It's a network, a global network. A prehistoric human could never participate in that network. Not because they weren't smart enough, but because the network didn't exist. There's a famous phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. It means that every human accomplishment is built on what came before. Isaac Newton said it. He was referencing scholars before him. And he was right. Every discovery builds on previous discoveries. Every invention builds on previous inventions. Every piece of knowledge is a layer on top of previous knowledge. Think about the history of mathematics. Ancient Babylonians discovered basic arithmetic. Ancient Egyptians developed geometry. Ancient Greeks formalized logic and proof. Medieval Islamic scholars preserved and expanded mathematical knowledge. Renaissance Europeans recovered and built on that knowledge. Newton and Leibniz invented calculus. And they built on everything that came before. It wasn't a single genius moment. It was thousands of years of accumulated understanding. And that's just math. Think about medicine. Ancient healers discovered that certain plants had healing properties. Medieval doctors dissected corpses to understand anatomy. Renaissance scientists improved dissection techniques. 17th century scientists used microscopes to see bacteria. 19th century scientists discovered germ theory. 20th century scientists developed antibiotics. And now, in the 21st century, we're using genetic engineering to cure diseases. None of that would have been possible without the previous layers of knowledge. A modern doctor isn't smarter than a medieval healer. The modern doctor just has access to 2,000 years of medical knowledge. The medieval healer had access to only a few hundred years. That's the difference. But here's something even more interesting. It's not just about individual knowledge. It's about culture. It's about systems. It's about how societies organize themselves to preserve and transmit knowledge. A prehistoric society didn't have schools. But they had teaching. Elders would teach younger people. They'd teach them how to hunt, how to make tools, how to identify plants. But this teaching was limited by lack of written language, harder to preserve knowledge across generations, limited communication knowledge trapped in specific communities, limited tools for recording, no books, no videos, no databases. A modern society has schools, universities, libraries, the internet. These are systems designed specifically to preserve and transmit knowledge. Teachers are paid to teach, libraries are publicly funded. The internet is available. These systems didn't exist in prehistoric times. That's one of the biggest differences. It's not about individual intelligence. It's about collective systems for preserving and sharing intelligence. A prehistoric human couldn't benefit from the accumulated knowledge of humanity because there was no system to store it, no system to share it, no system to transmit it. Modern humans benefit from centuries of systems designed to do exactly that. Now let me tell you something that might be uncomfortable. You are not self-made. Your intelligence is not your achievement. You didn't invent the internet. You didn't invent writing. You didn't discover mathematics or science. You inherited all of it. You were born into a world where these systems already existed. You were born into an information environment that was built by thousands of people before you. People who worked, studied, discovered, and died. People whose names you don't know. People whose contributions you benefit from every single day. And you probably don't think about that very much. You probably think you're smart because you're good at school, or your job, or solving problems. But you're only good at those things because you had access to an incredible amount of information. You had teachers, you had books, you had the internet. Most of human history, those things didn't exist. Most of the world's population, even today, doesn't have full access to them. That's not a coincidence. That's the primary difference between someone who has access to information and someone who doesn't. Not intelligence, information. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say there's a child born in a small village with no schools, no electricity, no books. Is that child less intelligent than you? Biologically, no. Their brain has the same capacity, the same potential. But if they never get to school, if they never learn to read, if they never have access to the internet, they will never have the opportunity to develop the same knowledge you have. They might become very skilled at things relevant to their environment. Maybe they're amazing at hunting, or farming, or navigating by stars. But they'll never learn calculus. They'll never understand physics. They'll never code. Not because they can't. Not because they're not smart enough. But because they don't have access to information. Now imagine that child gets a scholarship. That's to go to a good school. Gets access to books and computers. In 20 years, they could be a neurosurgeon, an engineer, a physicist. Did their intelligence change? No. Did their access to information change? Yes, completely. This happens all the time. Talented people emerge from poverty, from underfunded schools, from disadvantaged communities. When they get access to information. When they get access to good teachers, good resources. What changed wasn't their brain. What changed was their environment. This is why education access is so crucial. It's not about making people smarter. It's about giving people access to the information they need to develop the intelligence they already have. Okay, so we've established something important. A prehistoric human and a modern human have the same brain, the same capacity for intelligence. So what actually made humans dominant? What made one small, weak ape species take over the entire planet? The answer is not strength. Animals are stronger. The answer is not speed. Animals are faster. The answer is not claws or teeth or flying. The answer is something much stranger. The answer is our ability to create and share complex information. We can use symbols, written symbols and spoken symbols. We can tell stories. We can pass down knowledge. We can imagine things that don't exist and then build them. We can cooperate at massive scale because we can communicate complex ideas. A group of humans can organize to build a city, a government, a civilization. That's not because individual humans are super intelligent. That's because humans collectively can share information and cooperate on massive projects. A single prehistoric human is not that impressive. But tens of prehistoric humans working together, that's powerful. And that power comes from their ability to communicate, to share knowledge, to work together toward shared goals. That's what makes humanity unique. Not individual brilliance. Collective intelligence. The ability to pool knowledge across generations and across groups. That's why writing was such a game changer. Writing allowed knowledge to be stored outside of human memory. It allowed knowledge to travel beyond a single community. It allowed knowledge to accumulate and build on itself. It allowed collaboration across time and space. That's why the internet is such a game changer. It's the ultimate knowledge sharing system. Here's something I want you to really understand. You are part of a chain that extends back thousands of years. Someone invented fire, that knowledge passed down. Someone figured out agriculture, that knowledge passed down. Someone invented the wheel, that knowledge passed down. Someone invented writing, that knowledge passed down. Someone developed mathematics, that knowledge passed down. Someone discovered the scientific method, that knowledge passed down. Someone invented the printing press, knowledge became easier to share. Someone invented electricity. Someone invented the computer. Someone invented the internet. And all of that knowledge is now available to you. You didn't earn it, you inherited it. You didn't discover it, you learned it. And now, you're part of the chain too. You're learning from the past. And you're preparing the future. Every time you learn something and share it, you're continuing this chain. Every time you teach someone else, you're continuing this chain. Every time you create something and put it into the world, you're adding a link to this chain. Future humans will inherit what you create. Future humans will learn from your work. Maybe they'll learn from you directly, through books or videos or recordings. Or maybe they'll learn from work that was inspired by your work. That's how human civilization progresses. Not through individual genius. Through the accumulation of knowledge across generations. So let me come back to the original question. Are modern humans smarter than primitive humans? The answer is not really. We're smarter at using information that was discovered thousands of years ago. We're smarter at accessing collective knowledge. We're smarter at participating in systems of learning. But if you took away those systems, if you took away the books and the teachers and the internet, you wouldn't be smarter than a prehistoric human. You might be less smart, because you're used to having information instantly available. You're not used to learning through pure observation and experience. A prehistoric human, raised in the modern world, could learn everything you know. And a modern human, stripped of all information access, might struggle to survive in the prehistoric world. That's not a difference in intelligence. That's a difference in context, in access, in the systems and information available to us. We're not smarter brains. We're informed brains. And that information is a gift from thousands of years of human work, from people we'll never know, from people who struggled, discovered, and passed their knowledge forward. We're standing on their shoulders. And one day, future humans will stand on ours. That's what it means to be human. Not to be the smartest in the room, but to be able to take what you've learned and pass it on. To stand on the shoulders of the past and reach toward the future.